In the entirety of the Conservative Party, there are probably 40 to 50 MPs that believe in Brexit and believe in taking the opportunities. The rest are globalist establishment, and at the top of that is Rishi Sunak. And I do not believe he was a Brexiteer. If he was, do you know something? I didn't see it.
Hello and welcome to This Week in Review with Nigel Farage. Nigel, just like last week, I want to start with some reader mail. This one made me laugh out loud, so I'm betting you're going to enjoy it as well. Where is central bank policy really created? They're supposed to be independent. However, they seem to work as a pack of dogs. Who is really behind their thinking?
And the International Monetary Fund, major corporations, yes, they all seem to act and think in the same way. Chart this back over the last couple of years with the growth of inflation in our economies. They all got it wrong. They all had the same view. They all decided not to put rates up. Then there was a slight breakout from the Fed, who acted a little bit ahead of the others. The others then followed on. We've now had 10, 11, 12 interest rate rises, and we now seem to be rising, or our rates have risen in the face of, even though we've said on this show many, many times that inflation will be more sticky than predicted, the signs are that inflation is going to ease back a little bit. And so probably the Fed will then lead the way with rates coming down a little bit. But yeah, they act like a pack of dogs. They all think the same way, and they all have the same policy objective goals. Very interesting. I mean, the euro, which is essentially a political more than an economic construct, and yet, when those big crises occur, they all act together, led by the IMF, to do whatever they can to save the euro. So the idea, that Gordon Brown, almost 25 years ago, gave the Bank of England genuine independence is for the birds.
It's a good example of the reader question we had last week, which was about globalists and globalism. And it seems to me that central banks are a perfect example of that, where what used to be a national debate and a national policy issue has become like a pack of dogs on the international, on the globalist level. And they all make the same mistake. Do you think that makes the overall effect worse than it would be if, half the countries got it right and half of them got it wrong?
Well, no, I think half getting it right, half getting it wrong would lead to probably to more genuine, open debate about what the role of central banks ought to be and how they ought to operate. And I think when everyone acts together in consensus, the only people challenging it are people like us, which, important though that is, that debate is not happening on a big enough scale. That's the point.
I was watching a few videos this week of people who were claiming that just as the central banks had not raised interest rates fast enough to rein in inflation, they were now raising them too fast in order to try and regain some credibility, and that they were going to trigger some sort of financial crisis to the extent they haven't already, as a result of this sort of vain attempt to try and regain their credibility. What do you make of that argument?
Yeah, we should not be putting up rates right now. Right now, we should not be putting up rates. We're certainly talking UK, zero growth. Inflation, yes, I know it's sticky. I know food price inflation is very, very high. But, I don't think there's going to be a big spike in inflation from here any more than you do. I think it will come down between now and the end of the year. Not to the 2.9% that Mr. Sunak tells us it's going to be, but I think it will come down. So, no, I think they've been too slow to put them up, and I think they've got on putting them up at a time when they shouldn't be. And as I said a moment ago, it'll be the Fed that leads the way with some rate cuts, probably over the course of the summer.
And that's what's moving markets at the moment. The US dollar is falling because the rate cuts are likely to occur first in the US. In fact, the US bond market is pricing in 75 basis points of cuts by December, which is effectively 3 interest rate cuts by the end of the year, which is quite rapid given that inflation is not expected to fall, like you said, to their target. What could possibly happen in financial markets and economies over the next, 6 or 7 months that would make them cut interest rates 3 times?
Well, the thinking is changing, isn't it? The thinking is changing from worries about inflation to worries about almighty great recession. I think that's where the thinking is now going. We've been living in stagflation, if you think about it. We've had inflation and stagnant economies, and the worry is that as inflation starts to come down, you start to get some deflationary pressures actually within the overall health of the economy. So I think that's very much in Washington. The thinking in Washington is concerns about recession by the end of the year and a feeling that maybe 2 or 3 rate cuts might just stave that off.
Yeah, two things for readers to keep in mind here. First of all, the idea that central bankers are always behind the curve, meaning they figure things out too late. And secondly, the fact that it takes monetary policy a very long time to actually have an impact. So we're probably seeing the interest rate hike effects flowing through the economy right now. Meanwhile, central bankers have gone on and had another 10 or 11, as you said. I want to focus on the UK quickly. Some headlines that made me laugh as well this morning, actually. It seems that investment bankers have suddenly gone very bullish on the UK economy and on the pound. Not so long ago, they were telling us that it was going to be a very badly performing economy and currency. Now, Citi, NatWest, and Goldman Sachs are all very optimistic about the pound, expecting a surge. And we've got the deputy head of BlackRock Investment Institute saying the economy in the UK is effectively overheating rather than struggling. So what did they get so wrong?
Well, I think, the pound was low, and the pound has been very low. It's been cheap, and that, for private equity in particular, makes the UK a pretty attractive place to invest in. Now, look, I'm deeply frustrated that we haven't taken the benefits of Brexit. I think we could be doing so much better than we are doing. But in terms of a currency, against the dollar and against the euro, the pound, I think the pound at 126, whatever it is this morning, I think the pound still looked relatively cheap. So the UK seemed to be a relatively safe place to invest in. The government able to get gilts issues away without any problem. The big scares of December out of the way. So yes, I think, as a place for foreign money to come and invest, the UK is relatively attractive towards the others, but let's not kid ourselves. I wouldn't exactly call it boom time.
Yeah, there's this strange complexity in currencies where on the one hand, they reflect how well a government is conducting its economic policy. And on the other hand, they actually improve the economy by falling when the government is conducting economic policy very badly.
Of course. And this is the argument for floating rates. Yeah. It's why Italy being trapped in the euro in the end will be a disaster. There's a chap I know called Hubble's written a book about that.
Let's quickly move on then to the Brexit Bonfire story. It's sort of fizzled out, hasn't it? I know you'll be very disappointed about this, but I'm curious what you have to say about the reasoning and the excuses that are coming from the government, whether they're plausible or not. Because I know you must believe there is a blob in Westminster, but on the other hand, I don't think you're going to accept this excuse.
There's a blob in Westminster, but the real blob's called the Conservative Party. They never believed in Brexit. They fought against it for year after year after year. It wasn't until they were firmly kicked up the backside by me in May of 2019 that they actually got a leader that did believe in Brexit, or Boris half believed in Brexit. Truth is, in the entirety of the Conservative Party, there are probably 40 to 50 MPs that believe in Brexit and believe in taking the opportunities. The rest are globalist establishment, and at the top of that is Rishi Sunak. And I do not believe he was a Brexiteer. If he was, do you know something? I didn't see it. I didn't see him once out on the campaign trail. He did one little video with some smallholder farmers in North Yorkshire. I think he was a Brexiteer to save his seat in his own constituency. And yep, the globalists are back in charge. Jeremy Hunt's Chancellor. Any idea of genuine supply-side reform to increase our competitiveness is for the birds. And actually, far from becoming more competitive, what I'm seeing in a number of industries is we're actually in some ways now regulating worse than the European Union. We're actually taking the baseline of EU rules and making things even more onerous. So I'm absolutely furious. I said to Jacob Rees-Mogg last night, live on air, I was teasing him a bit. I said, is this a betrayal of the Brexit promises made in the 2019 general election? And he simply said, yes.
It looks like they haven't learned their lesson then, really, that Brexit wasn't enough of a lesson. But at least now they do control their policy, we're going to be able to hold them to account.
Yes, that's right. And the local elections last week did that to a certain extent. That was measured against a 2019 set of elections when the party was at a historic low. And of the 3,000 seats they were defending, they lost 1,000. and the newspapers say, that means there'll be a coalition. I'm pretty confident there'll be a Labour majority. I think a lot of those people who voted Green and Lib Dem last week will vote Labour in a general election in a first-past-the-post system. Ironically, first-past-the-post, which the Tories have always defended, might, with tactical voting, leave them actually with a rout when the election comes this time next year. There is no way that those people who voted Brexit, and I'm talking about small businesses, Midlands and Northern communities, some voted for economic reasons because they weren't part of the corporate world, others voted for societal and community reasons, that they saw mass levels of immigration changing their communities, damaging housing prospects for their kids, the inability to get GP appointments. We've got on May 25th, the next set of net migration figures coming out in the UK. They are likely to be 700,000. That is double the high in the years before Brexit. So if you voted Brexit because you actually thought too many people were coming in, the population was exploding too quickly, well, it's doubly worse than it was before that vote 7 years ago. And those votes are not coming back to the Conservatives. So I'm afraid the truth is we're going to be stuck with a Labour government with a high tax, high regulation model for many years to come. It doesn't mean that in relative terms we might not do quite well compared to our European neighbours, but it means we're not taking the opportunities and the advantages that you and I so very much wanted. And disappointing is an understatement.
Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up question, is how we perform relative to Europe, comparatively speaking. What is the risk of the left and Labour pursuing policy that really is harmful to the UK economy? Because my understanding is, especially from your book, which is, I think, behind me, that old Labour used to be against the European Union because they saw the EU as constraining the policies that they wanted to pursue. And now that we're out, is there a chance that those old Labour ideas that the EU sort of prevented them from pursuing, which would be really bad, are going to make a comeback? Obviously, it's less likely under Keir Starmer, but is there a risk?
Yeah, it's less likely. I think the truth of it is that the Social Democrat agenda that Keir Starmer will follow will be exactly the same as the one that's being followed by Sunak and Hunt. And back to the first question of today's chat, this is basically a series of Western governments relying on a high tax, high borrowing, big state intervention model. They're virtually all doing the same thing. This is globalism.